We are grateful and honored to have Susan as our guest speaker, and she is a Principal Planning Officer at South Glos Council. She has 14 years experience working within a range of planning authorities. I will now let Suzanne to talk further more about her planning experience and planning life.
Lovely, thank you very much. I'm a Principal Planning Officer at South Glos. I've only actually been in that post since November, so I only did 3 weeks of it before I went on maternity leave. But before that, I'd been a senior planner there in the major sites team. I'll start kind of how I started in planning, and we'll kind of work through to how I ended up where I am. I did geography for my undergrad, and then graduated. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. Did a couple of rubbishy jobs, and then thought, time to be a grown-up now. And I wanted to do something with my geography degree that wasn't being a teacher. And the only career they had shown me in geography was logistics. And I was like, don't think that's for me. So I kind of fell into planning by accident. And I got, mainly through Google, to be honest. And I applied to do a master's, and I got a deferred entry, and then I managed to get a 1-year placement at Woking Borough Council as my job title was graduate planning assistant. Really what happened is they used to have a gap year student from the sandwich course at Brunel, but they didn't get anybody, so they just advertised it as a job. And that was I mainly worked in DM there. I've worked in DM pretty much my whole career, although I used to do 1 day a week when I worked with the conservation officer, and that was in like the good old days when I used to administer grant applications, when you could get grants from the council to do work listed building. And doing that was actually really helpful because it helped to kind of learn what it was to be a planner and what you had to do, and kind of dealing with people and how to read plans, because I'd never looked at plans before, never seen it, and just sort of doing that real kind of basic stuff. I mean, Woking is not a hugely exciting or glamorous place. Apologies if any of you are from Woking, but there was a lot of doing applications for small scale stuff that would normally be permitted development from 2 estates that had all their PD rights removed. So I kind of, I really started with the basic stuff, and actually it's quite helpful, but it does get a little bit boring after a while. So when I finished doing that, after I've been there a year, I went to Newcastle to do my master's, and while I was up there, my specialism was urban design and conservation, more the conservation side, because that's really what I was interested in. And as we've discussed earlier, I can't draw, so I can't really be an urban designer. And I really enjoyed that. But one of the things that my tutor said to me while I was up there is, bright student, go to the private sector. The public sector is very much just ticking boxes. So kind of from that, I did go and work. I worked for a private sector consultancy for 6 months when I graduated, and it really just wasn't for me at all. It was a very corporate world, and I'm not a hugely corporate person. I think I'm not kind of business suits and doing things for my clients. So I was only there 6 months, and I had a really lovely boss, but it just wasn't really for me. So I left that, and I went to work at Bath and North East Somerset as a planning officer in their. I started off in their development management team, and after I'd been there a couple of years, I went and did a part-time diploma in historic environment conservation. So I kind of then moved that I had a dual role where I do part planning and part listed building, and I basically do a lot of dual applications. So when people apply for both planning and listed building consent in the same building, I do a lot of those type of applications without having to have that extra specialist input. And then I'd also sometimes do the specialist input for the other planning officers, which was quite interesting. So I was at Baines was there about 8 years, and it was a really great place to work, actually, because all of the planning issues you can think of are in that district. Greenbelt, areas of outstanding natural beauty, World Heritage Site, conservation areas, buildings, the full, market town, urban centre, rural planning, the full shebang. It's all there. And I had some really kind of interesting site visits. There was a day I went on site when they were doing up a hotel across the road from the office, handy, and went in, and they were like, right, we're going to extend into this building next door. We're going to go into the basement. Okay, so off we all troop into the basement. It's me, a chap I was friends with that worked at Historic England, sort of a similar age to me. I was a bit younger then, so I was in my kind of late 20s. And then a selection of middle-aged men in suits. We walk into the building. Turns out it used to be a gay sauna. That was an interesting experience. And me and the chap from Historic England are desperately trying to keep a straight face while we're kind of discussing things, and there's various bits of porn still on the floor. Always, so you never know what you're going to meet when you come out on site. I also once went on a site visit, and a man answered the door to me in a pair of Speedos, and then offered me a glass of champagne, and I went, no thanks, I just need to see it and then go very quickly. So it's always a bit of a kind of expect the unexpected sometimes when you're on site. So after I was at Baines, I then moved up to Tewkesbury, and I was there just under 2 years because I got a promotion to be a senior planner. And again, that was a totally different place. It was back to a 2-tier authority, so rather than the unitary, we had to go through county highways for things, and that's an interesting experience when all that's not in-house. But in some ways it was lovely. The entire council sat on one floor of a building, and it meant that you could go and really easily talk to people. Everybody knew who everybody was. So although it wasn't glamorous in the same way, it's not a headline authority in the same way when you say I work in Bath, people go, oh yeah. Actually, it was really nice. You'd see the chief exec making himself a cup of coffee in the kitchen, and he knew my name, and we'd have a chat. And that's actually, there's a lot to be said for that. And also the work was much more interesting than I was expecting it to be, because Tewkesbury's got a lot of growth, because it picks up all Cheltenham and Gloucester's housing allocations, because they can't have them within their districts, quite so many of them in their districts, because obviously of their constrained boundaries. And I also dealt with quite a lot of traveller applications, and I'd never done a traveller application before, and actually that was quite eye-opening, sort of dealing with those and the kind of different political sensitivities. Bath is a council that swings between Lib Dem and the Tories. Tewkesbury is very much a Conservative heartland. I think there were 3 councillors that went Tory on the whole council. And that's kind of interesting, kind of negotiating those politics. So from there, I then so I only went to Tewkesbury, and I kind of told my boss that I only really went to get the job that I moved to at South Glos, because I needed to get a senior planner's job. And one of the things with local government is you tend to need to move around to get promotions, and that's quite difficult sometimes in the South West, because there aren't that many authorities unless you're prepared to travel. So then I went to South Glos as a senior planner in their major sites team, and that deals with all the major strategic growth, principally housing, but there is other stuff across the South Gloucestershire area. I had my own sites, so my sites were Frenchay, Sevenside. So I started out doing historic buildings, and that was what my interest was, and I kind of then ended up doing these massive industrial sheds out by the River Severn. So that was a bit of a change, not where I saw my career going. And then I also did a little bit on North Yate and over at Lyde Green. So it was a kind of, it was almost it's a very different job, that was, because it's more of a project management type role. I didn't actually do that many planning applications because they were big and long term. I mean, one of the applications I started dealing with probably after I'd been there 3 weeks, it had already been in 2 years at that point. And when I left to go on maternity leave, it was still nowhere near being determined. So it's, some days you'd come home and think, what have I done today? And my son says to me, what did you do at work today, Mummy? And I go, well, I said a few emails, did a bit of reading. And there were days when you don't actually get that I'm ticking things for list kind of satisfaction, and there'd be a lot of like kind of bitty work that you do that you can't kind of encapsulate somewhere. But it is really interesting actually, because you really get to see sort of big things that you've done and the input you've had. So I live quite near the French development, and when I went on one of my many state mandated exercise walks the other day, I walked through the estate, and some of the development that we worked really, really hard on is now starting to come out of the ground, and you think, yeah, I've done that. That's me, that is, which is really nice actually. And then, so yeah, like I say, in November, I then got promoted to be a principal planner. So at South Glos, the way that the planning team works there is there's two planning teams. There's the development management team, which deals with most of the stuff, and then there's the major sites team, which deals with the strategic stuff, and it's a mix of planners and specialists. So I then moved across into development management as a principal, and that job is a lot more kind of being a mentor to young. It's doing the applications, but it's also kind of signing applications off, which I've never done before, and kind of being a mentor to the younger staff and a sort of sounding board for people to ask questions. I think I'm very much a kind of public sector planner, mainly because I listen to my friends that work in the private sector, both in planning and in other careers, and they're like, oh, my client's doing this, oh, the client's doing that. I can't be nice to people who are stupid, and I don't have to. If people are rude to me and people are shouting at me, I put the phone down on them. And it's also quite a nice job, because you have autonomy from day one. So my very first day, in my very first planning job, I got my own planning applications that I made. I say decisions. Why always used to say to people, I don't make decisions, I only make recommendations, but really you make the decisions. So you get that from your sort of first day. You get your own caseloads. Our kind of planning assistants at South Glos, from when they start, they get simple stuff, but it's their own work that they have to manage. They have to manage their deadlines themselves and write their own reports and make those recommendations. Whereas when I worked in the private sector, my boss used to fire work off to me, and he'd be like, get me a list of this, or look up these policies for that. And it was always a little bit like, oh, I never felt like anything belonged to me, because I was quite far down the pecking order, I think. So that's kind of how I ended up where I got to. I don't know if you want to fire some questions out, or is there anything you want to know?
Yeah, have you always known you wanted to be in this position, or you've just figured out from different sectors, like from different departments, I mean?
Yeah, just kind of made it up as I went along, really. I never really had a career plan. I did when I started at South Glos. My supervisor, when I first started, after I'd been there about 3 or 4 months, she became the development manager, and I kind of thought, actually, I'd really like to go and work for her and work with the junior planners, kind of mentoring them, because that's what I like. I'm very much I think there's 2 types of planners. You're either a people planner or you're a policy type planner. And by that, I mean, you're very good at, I cannot tell you what the thresholds are for retail impact assessments. I know where they are in the MPPF, but I don't memorise them. I can't tell you off the top of my head which class is what in the GDPO, but I'm good at people. I'm good at meeting people and talking to people, and kind of having those negotiations with people. And I think you're kind of one way or the other. And I think, especially in the public sector, being that kind of people person is quite important. And it wasn't until I'd sort of moved around a little bit that I realised that that's actually what I wanted to do.
Hi, Susie.
Hello.
So you mentioned being being a mentor to your kind of the planning assistants and stuff. What kind of things do you tell them? Like what do they learn from you?
How amazing planning is, obviously. I mean, I'll talk to them about what I learned off my mentor was having the confidence in my own decision making, and it's to try and give them that same thing, and helping them to know the difference between. One thing I struggled with in my early career was knowing the difference between when I didn't know the answer and when I just wanted someone to tell me I'd got the answer right. And it's, to kind of help them to be able to do that themselves, because I know what that's like. So it's about, people having that confidence, giving people confidence, and just letting them know, kind of talking through things, or things, I've been in planning quite a while now. I've worked in a few different places. I've got experience of different cultures, different ways of doing things. And I can sometimes say to them, oh, do you know what? I've done that somewhere else, or I know someone else that's done that, or you need to look at this. And it's just stuff that I know because I've done it before. Things that you wouldn't know if you haven't done it. Because I always think planning is, don't tell Katie or Nick this, but I always think planning is something very much that you can't teach somebody. You learn to be a planner by being, you can learn the theory. And I find planning, all that stuff I learned at doing my masters, really, really interesting. But actually, I didn't actually learn how to be a planner. And I think you need to, and it's about helping people to learn how to be a planner, and that it's okay to make mistakes, because we all, we're human beings, and for all that the government want to do it, that there's no subjectivity in planning, it is a subjective and emotive subject, and it's about how to kind of manage your way through that. Megan?
Mine's mainly about public sector planning, because my dissertation is majoritarily about that, and it's a lot harder to try and find the people who are the planners that make the decision, because they're noted in the reports, but like email address attached, compared to like counsellors, which are so easy to find and contact. It kind of feels like it's a important cog in the system that you don't really get too much recognition from if I want to go and contact you directly.
Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, I think some of that is to protect officers from members of the public, for want of a better phrase. I think one week I had somebody ring me at 9:10 on a Monday morning and told me I'd ruined their life. I mean, that's a kind of, when people have got your name and your number, they'll ring you and blame you for all sorts. And I think some of that is about kind of shielding people from some of that. I don't want to say backlash, that's the wrong word, but, kind of maybe publicity, especially, in this age of social media. I've had people from my Tewkesbury days that I had to block on my Twitter. God, my Twitter's boring, but they would sort of, they had an axe to grind with the council planning department, and they would like attack me over it. I was South West chair of the RTPI for a year in 2018, and they kind of latched on to something a picture I'd put up, and it was a picture of me eating a bacon sandwich holding a balloon at an event, going, yay, planning, I'm such a professional. And he was like, oh, look at you dragging down the good name of the planning department, and kind of having a bit of a pop at me for being unprofessional, and that I was a kind of a bad person and for the RTPI, a bad representative. And it was just like, oh, I know you didn't get planning permission and it upset you, and I think some of that is to kind of, I can take it with a pinch of salt now. When people first used to ring me, I used to get really upset when people shouted at me on the phone, because it is really hard. And I think that's a really difficult thing about working in the public sector, is that from when you're dealing with people, your first sort of job, you're dealing with extensions and stuff in people's houses, and that's people's actual lives, people that are having to extend because they can't afford to move and they need a bigger house. Whereas when you're a bit more senior and you're dealing with major developments, ultimately it's just money. It's just, you're just dealing with professionals. There's none of that emotion in it. The people at the big planning consultancies, they want to do the best for their clients, but it's not that personal thing. And I think that sometimes is quite difficult for people. So I think that's a really long, rambling answer. as to why we might not necessarily get that or that recognition. And I think planning as well, it's not very glamorous. You know, you see, I always remember a former colleague of mine saying, the thing with planning is you only ever see our mistakes. People never see the terrible stuff we've said no to. They only ever see the bad stuff we've said yes to. And I think sometimes as well, when people get your name, they can just contact you. And a lot of planning departments, and South Glos is definitely one of them, they are up to their eyes in work, and it's quite difficult to it's difficult to do the day job, let alone the sort of the other stuff. That said, if you do want to contact people, I'd just go with the general planning addresses and ask, or the development manager's name is on everything. And actually, you know, we were all students, and people are willing to help, you know, people do, you know, and use the networks, use the RTPI network, use Women in Planning. You know, we can fire stuff around our colleagues and things to see, or our contacts, and to kind of help people, because, you know, you go into public sector planning, you don't go into it for money or glory. You go into it because you want to do the right thing for places. You know, this is the first time I've ever lived in the authority that I work in, and it's, you know, I don't it to be rubbish. I mean, I don't want anywhere to be rubbish, whether I live there or not, but you go because you care about people and you care about environments. I'm not saying that people that work in the private sector don't, but, you know, I sort of see my job as acting in the best interests of the residents of South Gloucestershire, not the best interests of the shareholders of whoever it is, or whoever it is that lives in that house at the moment, and that they want what they want, because they won't always live there, and their next door neighbour won't always live there, and it's about kind of thinking of places for the future.
Thank you. And on a brighter side for the planning bit, which part do you enjoy the most?
I like going outside, actually. That's probably my favourite bit. I couldn't do a job where I was stuck at a desk all day, every day. I mean, I say that, and it's the best job in the world on a day like today. I mean, I've been standing in farmers' fields in torrential rain and hail. Not so great then. But actually, it's nice. You know, you get to go out, you get to meet a lot of different people. I sort of refer to it as being a professional nosy Parker, because I've been to people's houses. You know, when I worked in Bath, I used to go to private houses in the Royal Crescent and some of the other crescents, and I've been out on the roof, you know, of places in Bath and seen views that you just normally wouldn't see, and that for me is the best bit, just sort of having a bit of a nose at things. And we always used to one thing that was always quite fun when I worked at Tewkesbury is we used to have a team meeting every other week where we'd get some of our applications out that are a bit difficult and kind of talk through them. And one of the things that was always quite fun is when you'd get kind of the rich people's applications for new houses out in the Cotswolds. Money cannot buy you taste. Let's just put it like that. And, you know, we'd always have a bit of fun looking at I mean, I've seen a boot room, a luggage room, lots of cinema, a dog and cat room. And that's, you know, that's always quite fun, you know, seeing what people want and what they're calling things. So, you know, it's a great job if you like going out and you like seeing places. I've been to places, you know, before I started working at South Glos, the only bits of South Glos I really knew was Sainsbury's at Emerson's, Sainsbury's at Filton, where I live, and Yates. And that was basically it. Whereas now I've been to sort of loads of places, and it's quite a good way of kind of exploring your area.
Does anyone have other questions?
Yeah, I was just, could you give me some just like general tips on, you know, CV and networking and stuff like that, if you have any?
Yeah, well, CVs I'm not so good on, because public sector jobs, you don't need a CV. It's all application forms. But a friend of mine who works in HR roles used to say to me on my CV, she's like, your employers are interested in what you can do, they're not necessarily that interested in your qualifications. So talk about specific projects that you've done and how that link what you did. And kind of in application forms, I have a habit of saying we did this, meaning we the council, whereas actually you need to kind of take ownership of what you've done, and this was the bit that I did, and this is why I did it, and maybe this is what I do differently next time. So sorry, CVs, and what was the other bit? I've started talking, can't remember the question.
Just like general networking tips and how to just get onto the platform playing field kind of thing.
Go to events, join networks. So I joined the RTPI South West on their committee. When did I join there? About 2014, I think. Because I felt a bit like my career wasn't really going anywhere, and I felt a bit stuck. And actually, when I first joined, it was really scary because I went to events, I didn't talk to anybody that I didn't know, but actually, people are really keen to talk to you and to help you. You've just got to kind of get through that scary bit. And through being on the RTPI committee, I've met loads of people and I've done loads of really interesting stuff. I've done guest lectures at UE. I've judged awards. So really, just try and get involved in things. Lovely will tell you about how great Women in Planning is and their events. When we're allowed to have events in public again, because I know it's a bit difficult online, and it's like I find I'd have meetings online with my own team, and that was really difficult. So to kind of have meetings or networking with people, it's really, online is really, really tricky. But hopefully we'll all be allowed to go out again soon, and you will be able to we will be able to meet people. But I found when I sort of started my career, I went to visit different. So I'm from Wolverhampton, and I went to Birmingham for a couple of days, Birmingham City Council, to kind of speak to different people in their planning department. And actually, people are okay. People are on board with having people in normally. Or we had somebody. When I was at South Glos, we set up individual meetings with her, and we just spoke to her about what we did. And I think if you know somebody, you know a name, ask them if they can introduce you to people, because people are willing, or just send emails to team leaders and say, can you do this? I mean, I'm on maternity leave at the moment. If I wasn't, then I'd be quite happy for you to email me and I'd try and help you out. But yeah, try emailing the development manager and tell her that you've spoken to me. That is obviously not my name that's written there, as we discussed earlier. But tell them that that, and just see if she can set something up. I'll text her and tell her. You might get some emails on people. But just ask people questions, and even when you if you get in to go somewhere, or like in your job. Even just ask questions and ask people if they'll show you what they do. I mean, I had somebody, one of the planning assistants in planning policy at South Glos. He came over and he said, "I'm really interested in this. Can I shadow you?" So he came to shadow me on one of my big sites, and actually had loads of interest and ideas, because planning's not. I don't think anybody has all the answers. There are things that different people see different things, and sometimes actually sites change your hands, which is a pain because you have to learn everything. But it's fresh eyes, and people are in my experience, most people are very willing to offer you the benefit of their experience. So ask people if you can shadow them, ask people what they do, ask people how they got there, do they like it, what they do differently, because people will kind of answer. That's the biggest thing, I think, get involved. I was never really involved in young planners, because when I was at my young planner stage, I wasn't particularly interested in the networking, because I saw it very much as a private sector thing. But actually, it's really interesting in the public sector, because you get stuck on things and you think, I wonder how they do that. I wonder how they do that somewhere else. Or somebody will send me something, one of my applicants will send me something and say, wow, this is what they do at such and such a place. And I'll be like, hang on, I know somebody there. Send them a quick email. So, yeah, just get involved, go to stuff, talk to people, and ask loads of questions. That would be my top tip. Megan? Oh.
Have you found that with COVID-19 and the more virtual aspect of community engagement, has it been easier to try to get views, or has it kind of opened a can of worms with more views coming in a torrential downpour because more people can maybe do it compared to like a forum where it would just be in like a hall or something?
I personally haven't really found it any different. I mean, I don't know. That's probably a question that's better pitched at a policy team, because that's more what they'd be doing. I was involved in a WECA project and a placemaking steering group, and we were looking at doing the placemaking charter, and we had a couple of online groups. And I think part of the problem is you can only have a limited number of people invited, so it's a very kind of almost select guest list it becomes, and technology can be an issue. So 10 minutes into a group I was hosting, facilitating in a workshop, my computer turned itself off. It took me 15 minutes to get back in, so that's quite difficult. I think in terms of the general, so planning applications still advertised in the way that they were always advertised on, and people generally comment online. I get very, very few actual letters. I think I can count on my fingers the number of handwritten letters that I've had in the past couple of years. There is perhaps people are getting a bit more involved because they're at home, they've got time, they're going, all you can do is go for a walk. So you know, people are seeing site notices and getting in touch with you, and people have got and it also kind of on the other side of that, our workloads have gone because people are stuck at home. I speak as somebody themselves who was having their loft converted at the end of the year because people are at home and they're going, oh, I could get that done. Oh, wouldn't it be good if I had this much more space? So everything in that sense has gone a bit bonkers. But in terms of kind of forums and people getting involved, it might be better if you were to speak to somebody that works in a planning policy type role.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I've got a question if no one has any question. How is it looking like for graduates, BSc planner graduates, to be working in public sector in the coming year, in the future?
I think it's a bit of a kind of watch this space, really, because obviously the public sector is financially perhaps not as well off as it could have been with COVID and things. Sorry, I'm about to get interrupted by a child, so if you do hear some shrieking in the background, it's my other child coming home. I think one thing that's quite difficult is that the public sector doesn't pay as well as the private sector, and it can be quite hard to kind of attract people into that first job. And also, our South Glos tend to recruit people as planning assistants on temporary contracts, you know, which was a kind of thing to see if you like it and if you're a fit for us and we're a fit for you. There is always plenty of work. It's whether or not that there's the money to kind of employ people. I mean, I think one thing that's quite difficult in the public sector is in the private sector, the promotions are a bit, they can basically make you a promotion up if they like you, or you've been there a certain amount of time, or you've got your RTPI, you can get a promotion. Whereas in the public sector, you kind of have to wait for a job to appear. But you do see a sort of, we've got probably half a dozen planning assistants, and there's always some movement with people moving on to like promoted internally or promoted elsewhere. So there are those sort of entry level jobs, and I think for me, I think it was a really good thing that I did. I went and I did a year just doing those sort of small applications to kind of learn about planning, and I think it helps. Although I didn't really enjoy working in the private sector. I think it was helpful that when I went to the private sector, I kind of knew what it was like on the public side of the fence, and now I know what it's like on the private side of defence. So I think it's nice to have a kind of range of experience. I think one thing that, like when I started in my career, you could get a job at local authority and they would pay for you to do your master's day release. That I think is becoming a lot rarer unless you're doing the kind of apprentice type route. I know what we do at South Glos is employ people part-time, so we don't pay for them to do it, we don't pay them while they're there, but they get that day off a week or 2 days a fortnight. I can't remember how it works at UE for to go and do the masters. And in some ways, from my point of view, I think that's perhaps a better way of doing it. So I did my masters full time and I paid for it myself, and it gave me that freedom, because if you do it day release and your employer pays, you are kind of tied to them for I think 2 or 3 years after you've finished, and that can, unless you can get another authority to agree to take the debt on, which they don't always want to do now. So it's, I think, kind of getting a bit of experience. There are jobs, they're not fabulously well paid, they're better paid than my first planning job, but I think it's useful to have that bit of experience, even if you get it before you do the masters. I think is probably worth more than the financial reward. And I'd be hopeful. The building industry is picking up. The government, the messages coming out of government is that. Sorry. Sorry, my son finds it hilarious to ring the doorbell and then hide when you answer the door. It's the funniest thing in the world. Where was I? The messages coming out of government is that kind of house building is critical to the economy. So if that all starts to pick up, then there will be kind of more money coming into the public sector through planning fees, because planning is an income generating service within a local authority, and hopefully there's always a little bit of a lag, but there are jobs around, and I see it sort of, you see a kind of fair amount of jobs kind of coming through on the planning jobs websites and stuff. So hopefully things may be a bit tight in the short term, but in the slightly longer short term, if that makes sense, that there will be jobs around for people.
Thank you.
What advice would you give recent graduates? Because majority of us are in our third year. Some of us are continuing to do masters. Some of us are straight on trying to find jobs. What kind of advice would you give to us?
I think kind of like I said earlier, ask lots of questions and try and just get involved in stuff. If you think something's interesting, try and get involved in it, because I've done things. So I got involved in this WECA placemaking group kind of completely by accident, really. I just sort of was in the right place at the right time and then went, no, I'm staying involved in this. And that's the thing, get involved in stuff, meet people, you make contacts, and actually you find then that you will kind of find things that you didn't ever think that would be what your interest was. I kind of wanted to be a conservation officer. That's what I wanted to do. And actually, I've kind of moved quite far away from that now. I still like listed buildings, but it's not kind of my focus. And I learned that through doing. And I think it's don't be frightened of going somewhere where you don't know anybody, because generally people are nice and people do like talking about their job. Go to networking events, chat to people there, and if you see an opportunity that you are kind of interested in but you're not really sure, I would say go and give it a go. I went to work at Tewkesbury, I knew nothing about it. I'd never been there before I went for my interview. I knew absolutely nothing about it, and it was great. you know, I had a great couple of years. It's a great team. It was a really different experience, and I think know that change, it's frightening, but it's a good thing, and don't kind of think that you're only going to have a good experience or a kind of a decent experience if you want to work at one of the big, you know, urban authorities. You want to work at Bristol or Baines or, you know, I'm not going to say South Glos because Yate's not really a big urban place, is it? But kind of don't be put off by the fact that it's not necessarily a big place that you've heard of, because there's actually there's always more going on than you think there is, even in sort of really, really small places. And actually, if you work somewhere where there's a small team, sometimes there's more opportunities to get bigger stuff earlier on because there's less people there. So you will get sort of different opportunities.
Anyone has more questions? If not, then I think we will end here.
If anybody does think of any like burning question that they've got, if they contact Women in Planning, they can send them on to me and I can reply to you. I've got 2 default responses with emails: immediately or like in a million years. But if you want to send, if you think of anything you want to know, then do send them on, and I'm more than happy to answer them. Or if people want to talk to me again, I promise a small child won't ring the doorbell in the middle of it. You know, I'm more than happy to kind of to talk to people if they want, if there's anything they want.
Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.